for the sharing of the gospel, which you can find in your pew Bibles on page 881. Our gospel comes from the book of St. John, the 18th chapter, beginning at verse 33. Then Pilate entered the headquarters again, summoned Jesus, and asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered, "Do you ask this on your own, or did others tell you about me?" Pilate replied, "I am not a Jew, am I? Your own nation and the chief priests have handed you over to me. What have you done?" Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not from this world. If my kingdom were from this world, my followers would be fighting to keep me from being handed over to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not from here." Pilate asked him, "So you are a king?" Jesus answered, "You say that I am a king. For this I was born, and for this I came into the world, to testify to the truth. Everyone who belongs to the truth listens to my voice." This is the gospel of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Please be seated. Grace and peace to you from God our Creator and from Jesus, the Son of God and King of creation. Amen. I have this theory. It's a really very simple theory. I believe that there are two kinds of people in the world. There are dog people, and there are cat people. I just want to check in and do a little bit of a survey here. If you are a dog person, please raise your hand. Let's just see how many dog people we have out there, okay? All right. If you are a cat person, please raise your hand. Okay, you people, you're just wrong. I'm just saying. Well, I think, though, that we can draw an entire spiritual and theological framework around the idea of cats and dogs. Now, you know how when you come home and a dog comes running over to you when you walk in the door and is so excited to see you and is jumping and just wants attention and wants to be pet and all that kind of stuff? Well, a dog with theology would interpret the dog as saying, "You feed me, you pet me, you shelter me, you love me. You must be God." Now, on the flip side, a cat theology would go like this. The cat would say, "You feed me, you pet me, you shelter me, you love me. I must be God." So one way of looking at our own sense of identity is to ask ourselves the question theologically, am I a dog or am I a cat? And really, if we took the question back even one step further, what we have to ask ourselves is, who is in charge? Now today, we gather for worship as we do every week. We gather in praise and thanksgiving, in celebration of the lordship of Jesus as the King of all creation. We acknowledge Jesus as Lord of our lives. Now what I found is that while this is a pretty easy thing for us to talk about, it can be a difficult thing for us to live. In other words, while we talk the talk of the dog theology, oftentimes we live more like the cat. We are experts at compartmentalizing our lives. We say, "God, we totally give you kingship over this part of my life and this part and maybe this part, but this part over here and maybe this part, I want to maintain control of these myself." We are good at giving God dominion over our Sundays, but we tend to want to maintain control of our Mondays through our Saturdays. Maybe it's in our work life, or maybe it's our family life, or maybe it's a relationship that we are in, or perhaps it's school life. Whatever it is, there are parts of our lives that we tend to hold back from God. But when we gather to worship, we are reminded that when we call Jesus our King, He is King of all, with nothing held back. Now, in our culture, we're really not used to this. We value our independence. We value our ability to make our own decisions. And we tend to rebel against anything that limits us. We don't want to be dependent on anyone or anything. If so, then we think we are perceived as weak. And we're not used to the idea of a king. In our American culture, that's not language that we are used to. That's dog language. It gives authority over to someone else, and we want to feel more like cats. We want to be independent. We want to be in charge. But the truth that Jesus teaches us in today's gospel is a simple twofold truth. First, we are not in charge. We are subject to a king. And second, our king is good. In our gospel text, after Jesus was arrested, Pontius Pilate asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus gives a startling answer. He says, "My kingdom is not from this world. If my kingdom were from this world, my followers would fight for me. But my kingdom is not here." Pilate, probably a little confused by this answer, asks again, "So you are a king?" Jesus answers, "You say that I am. For this I was born and came into the world, to testify to the truth. Those who belong to the truth, listen to my voice." Now, to be honest, this is not an easy text. Jesus isn't giving a clear, simple answer. But in this text, I believe that Jesus is defining his kingdom and his reign. He is saying that he is a different kind of a king. He's not interested in the political things of this world. He is coming to bring a different kind of a monarchy. He's coming not to rule with armies. He has no interest in rebelling against the Romans. He is coming to bring truth. While most kings had a reign over a geographic region, Jesus' reign is over a spiritual region. He is the king of all who hear his voice and believe in this truth. Pilate, he cannot begin to understand what Jesus is talking about. Now, kings get mixed reviews throughout history. Certainly there have been many, many good and gracious kings. Likewise, there have been some kings who were self-serving or even tyrants. I actually met a king once. While I was a student, I was a sound technician at Gustavus Adolphus College. We ran sound for conferences and concerts and events. But one time we hosted the King of Sweden on our campus. I was the guy who, under the close watch of the Swedish Secret Service, bet you didn't even know there was a Swedish Secret Service, did you? But I got to clip the king's lapel mic onto his coat. King Carl Gustav XVI of Sweden, he was a nice guy. I clipped on his microphone, he looked me in the eye, and he said, "Thanks." Now, the role of a king is not just to rule over people. It's not supposed to be about power. A king is supposed to be someone who stewards or tends to the people, who takes care of them and makes sure that their needs are met. In 1940, Nazi Germany invaded Denmark. Now, like so many other small European nations, this Scandinavian country was very quickly conquered. But the spirit of the Danish people and their king proved unquenchable. Even after the Nazis had taken control of the nation, King Christian X of Denmark boldly led his people, the Danes, in a quiet but courageous resistance movement. On one occasion, the king noticed a Nazi flag flying over a public building in Copenhagen. He went to the German commandant and asked that the flag be removed. "The flag flies," the commandant replied. "Request denied." "Well, if you do not have it removed," said the king, "a Danish soldier will climb the flagpole, and will remove it. Then he will be shot," said the commandant. "I don't think so," said King Christian, "for I shall be that soldier." The flag was removed. Later, the order came that all the Jews in Denmark were to identify themselves by wearing armbands with the yellow Star of David. King Christian said that one Danish person was exactly the same as the next. So the king, who was a Christian, donned the first Star of David. The next day in Copenhagen, almost the entire population, most of whom were Christians, wore armbands showing the Star of David. The king and his people saved over 90% of their Jewish population. You see, King Christian X was a different sort of a king. He may have been born into his position, but ultimately his people developed a great love and allegiance to him because of his great love and allegiance to them. Their loyalty had no boundary. They would have followed him anywhere. Why? Well, because the love he had for his people had no boundary. Christian X was a different sort of king. He stood in the gap between his people and evil, literally between life and death. He was a king who was a servant. He was a king worthy of being followed. Now, as Christians, as people of faith, we understand this. We know what it is to follow a different sort of king. Our king didn't climb a flagpole. Instead, our king climbed onto a cross to give his life for his people. And no matter what kind of boundaries we create, no matter how we try to compartmentalize or maintain lordship over our own lives, Jesus reminds us today, no, I am king over not just a portion of your lives, over all of your lives. And our king provides all we have and all we need. Every aspect of our lives, the physical, emotional, relational, social, financial, everything we have belongs to God. When we take the credit for all the things we have, for our salary, for our being able to provide for our families, we are compartmentalizing and we are denying the kingship of Christ, who gives all things to us. But when we recognize Jesus as King and Lord over all, everything changes. We live into the grace that God provides. The love of God is a constant. Nothing can change that, and nothing can separate you from it. That is the promise we receive from God. But when we live into it, when we learn to recognize it within our lives and in the world around us, and when we learn to look at the world through the lens of grace and gratitude, our very being aligns with God's grace. Not because of what we're doing, but because of what God did through Jesus Christ. It is quite simply a miracle. We have a different kind of a king. He is not distant. He is not aloof. He comes to us and seeks us out. He is approachable. He gives without question and he loves without condition. He cares deeply about each one of you without condition. Yes, we all occasionally slip into a cat theology, where we are the center of our own universe. That is part of the human condition that we call sin. We love to be in charge. We love to be in control. It is all too often all about me. With all due respect to cat lovers out there, God calls us into a theology of a dog, where we can say with faithfulness and confidence, you feed me, you care for me, you shelter me, you love me. You must be God. You must be our King. The God of grace gives you all that you need, cares for you, gives you shelters in the storms of your life, loves you unconditionally, and stands in the gap between life and death for you. Our King asks that with confidence. You trust fully in him. Amen.